Usually when you're driving your car and, say, a dashboard warning light comes on, the solution is pretty intuitive. Like the check engine light appears, you take it in, and the mechanic fixes the engine.
Right. Yeah, that's how it's supposed to work.
Exactly. But imagine you're hurtling down the highway, the temperature gauge is completely maxed out, the engine is literally smoking, the wheels are violently rattling, and your mechanic just leans over and suggests, changing the brand of your windshield wiper fluid.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's just a total disconnect, right, between the structural failure actively experiencing and this purely cosmetic solution being offered.
And that precise feeling of disconnect, that's really the foundation of the deep dive we are taking you, the listener, on today, because we are unpacking a very specific, highly political stack of source material, specifically issue 1175 of the e-paper The Socialist, which was published in the summer of 2026.
And it is a dense read.
It really is. Before we get into the weeds here, I want to be crystal clear with you about our mission today. This source material comes from a distinct left-wing socialist perspective. We are not here to endorse these views, and we are certainly not taking sides on the politics.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Our goal is strictly to impartially map out how this specific movement views the current, rapidly changing landscape of the UK and the globe.
Right. And the scope of what they cover to prove their point is massive. I mean, we're going to explore everything from the UK getting a brand new prime minister to a multi-billion-dollar Trump-linked luxury resort sparking a literal flamingo revolution in Albania.
Which is an incredible story.
It's wild. And we're zooming all the way down to a bitter local fight over a park and ride in Cardiff. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with a political earthquake in the UK. According to the text, Keir Starmer has just been completely booted out of office.
Yeah, and the publication is very, very deliberate about the causality behind Starmer's downfall. They argue he wasn't ousted just because of, a few bad polling weeks or a PR blunder.
Right, it goes deeper than that for them.
Exactly. The source frames his exit as a direct, inevitable result of his government attacking working-class benefits. They specifically point to his cuts to winter fuel payments and attempts to slash disability benefits.
So they view his removal as essentially the consequence of a fundamental betrayal of the working class.
Yeah, that's exactly how they frame it.
Which leads us to July 20th, 2026. Andy Burnham takes over as prime minister. But the core of the socialist critique we're looking at here argues that Burnham's arrival means absolutely nothing of substance will change.
Right. They see it as completely superficial.
According to this publication, Burnham is keeping the exact same fiscal rules. He's continuing to cut public services, he's boosting military spending, and he's maintaining the same anti-migrant stance as his predecessor. And they heavily cite his reliance on Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood to back that up.
And to really illustrate this political continuity, the source contrasts the government's austerity rhetoric with some pretty stark economic data.
Oh, the numbers they pull are wild.
Yeah, they really are. Because while the Burnham government claims, there's just no money to invest in public services, the paper highlights that banker bonuses actually hit £16.4 billion in the first quarter of a year.
Wait, 16.4 billion in just one quarter?
Just one quarter. It's the highest since the 2008 financial crisis. And they also pull in an Oxfam report noting that the UK's richest 56 people currently hold more wealth than the bottom 27 million combined.
That's just a staggering wealth gap.
So the publication is aggressively arguing that the wealth definitely exists. It's just being hoarded at the very top.
It's like firing the CEO of a company for enforcing terrible, unsafe working conditions, and the new CEO comes in, keeps the exact same corporate policies in place, but just, sends a slightly nicer company-wide memo about it. It sounds like they view this as changing the captain of a sinking ship, but the new captain is just refusing to patch the hole in the hull.
That's a great analogy. And because of that dynamic, the publication views the entire mainstream political spectrum as a farce right now.
Right. They bring up the Clacton by-election.
Yes, they point to Clacton as the ultimate example of this absurdity, noting that Nigel Farage triggered the election by resigning over sleaze scandals and is now essentially out there debating Count Binface.
Literally arguing with a bin.
Exactly. Because the mainstream parties have abandoned serious policy platforms, it leaves this weird vacuum filled by satirical or far-right figures.
So what's their alternative?
Well, the socialist alternative presented in this paper is a complete rejection of that entire political theater. They outline very specific demands: a £15 minimum wage, mass council housing, and the immediate nationalization of water and energy.
Okay, but realistically, how does a grassroots workers' movement force a 15-pound minimum wage or the nationalization of energy? I mean, the major political parties have billions of pounds in backing. Isn't this publication just outlining like a form of socialist utopianism that has no actual mechanism to achieve power?
What's fascinating here is that the publication directly addresses that skepticism. The tension throughout this entire document is between parliamentary politics and industrial action.
Meaning strikes and walkouts.
Right. The dominant narrative in Westminster is to, give Burnham time to settle in. But the trade union activists highlighted in the source groups like the National Shop Stewards Network, who are scheduled to lobby the Trades Union Congress in Brighton on September 13th, they argue that relying on the Labor Party is just a dead end.
So they don't want to lobby MPs anymore.
No, their proposed mechanism for change isn't lobbying at all. It's withholding labor. They are pushing to build a brand new mass workers' party built entirely on the economic leverage of mass strikes.
Well, and if local British unions are arguing that economic leverage is their only real tool, I think it changes how you look at the physical environments where they actually do that work. Because reading through this paper, you realize this critique of government inaction isn't just about abstract fiscal rules or, economic theory. It's about literal physical survival on the front lines.
Yeah, absolutely. The government's refusal to invest in infrastructure is violently colliding with a worsening climate crisis. And the source provides some really sobering statistics on this.
The heat dome numbers stood out to me.
Yeah, Europe recently saw 10,000 excess deaths from a single June heat dome. And they describe these brutal workplace realities. You have hospital wards hitting 35 degrees Celsius, bus and train cabins baking at 40 degrees, and almost half of construction workers are now reporting heat-related illnesses.
The text mentions that a Green MP, Hannah Spencer, actually introduced a bill to establish maximum working temperatures to combat this. But the main bosses federation, the CBI, is actively opposing it.
Right, and the publication argues the CBI's opposition is entirely financial. Employers view adding cooling systems or reducing work hours without a loss of pay, of course, as an unacceptable added cost.
But the text also points out a glaring hypocrisy in how fast the legislative state can move when it actually wants to.
Oh, the football example.
Yes. Here's where it gets really interesting. It notes that the government managed to pass emergency legislation just days before a football match so that pubs could stay open until 5 a.m. for a FIFA game.
Priorities.
Right. So I have to ask on behalf of you, the listener, if the state can move that incredibly fast for a football match, why is a bill for basic worker safety stalling in Parliament?
The publication argues that this discrepancy reveals the true function of the state under capitalism, which they say is simply to facilitate commerce. Extending pub hours for a FIFA game generates immediate revenue. It keeps the profit wheels turning.
And the temperature bill does the opposite.
Exactly. Mandating maximum working temperatures introduces friction to those profit wheels. It requires capital investment that doesn't generate a financial return. And the source highlights a massive corporate purchase to illustrate how capitalism adapts when the asset itself is at risk.
The Eurostar trains.
Yeah, Eurostar just bought a £1.7 billion fleet of new trains, specifically designed to operate in temperatures up to 55 degrees Celsius.
A 55-degree train is basically a mobile oven, but they are willing to spend nearly £2 billion to protect the physical trains, while the human beings operating and riding them are treated as, essentially, expendable overhead. And the text starkly contrasts the Eurostar purchase with the fact that 96% of UK homes lack air conditioning completely.
It is the logic of treating human health as a cost rather than an imperative. And the source argues that this exact same logic, treating citizens as a drain on resources, is being aggressively applied to the most vulnerable sectors of society, particularly when you look at public services.
Yeah, the paper spends a significant amount of time dissecting the Timms review on the Personal Independence Payment, or PIP, which is a vital disability benefit.
And their take on that review is scathing.
It is. The publication claims this review is intentionally weaponizing the suffering of disabled people just to justify budget cuts, pointing out that PIP makes up barely 1% of the total budget, yet it's being heavily targeted.
The ideological battle they outline there revolves around what the government calls a biopsychosocial model. Mechanically, this model allows the government to argue that providing financial support actually incentivizes people to remain disabled.
Basically framing the crisis as psychological or like a motivational issue.
Right, which is highly controversial. The activists cited in the text dismantle this by pointing to structural realities. They argue, look, we have a rapidly aging workforce, meaning more people naturally acquire disabilities as they work longer.
Plus the pandemic fallout.
Exactly. We're dealing with the massive ongoing health fallout of long COVID. So they argue the rise in claimants is an epidemiological reality. It's not a motivational failing.
And the frustration in the text isn't just directed at the government, which I found really compelling. The publication heavily criticizes the leadership of the TUC, the Trades Union Congress, for refusing to implement motions 38 and 39.
Which were designed to protect those very workers.
Right. They were specifically designed to organize sustained action to defend disabled people from these exact cuts. It conveys this profound feeling of being abandoned by the very institutions designed to protect you.
And the text draws a direct parallel from that abandonment to the education sector, where higher education is currently facing a staggering £100 million cut.
The story about the student was heartbreaking.
It really was. The publication draws a direct, tragic line between welfare cuts at Brunel University and the suicide of an engineering student named Joss Winfield. They argue you simply cannot strip away welfare programs without placing vulnerable people in fatal situations.
And that stripping away of resources extends to primary and secondary schools as well. The government offered teachers a 6.5% pay rise over 2 years. I think it was specifically 3.5% in the first year, then 3% in the second.
That's right.
But the text reveals that this raise is unfunded by the central government to the tune of £461 million. So wait, if the government grants a pay raise but doesn't actually provide the $461 million to the schools to fund it, aren't they basically forcing those local schools to fire people just to afford the raises for the ones who get to stay?
That is precisely the systemic catch-22 the publication is highlighting here. The central government gets to claim a massive political victory for raising pay, but they force local authorities to essentially cannibalize their own infrastructure to pay for it.
It's just passing the buck.
Exactly. And the National Education Union calculates that this £461 million shortfall equates to 8,300 lost jobs in schools, roughly 3,900 teachers, and 4,400 support staff.
Which totally explains why the paper is full of reports of these hyper-local strikes. You have 15 schools in Enfield striking over a punitive sickness policy. You have staff at St. Ignatius Catholic School striking against academization, which is basically taking schools out of local authority control and running them more like private corporate trusts.
Right, and this raises an important question regarding the mechanics of resistance. With all of this localized anger bubbling up in schools and hospitals and transit sectors, why aren't the massive national trade unions presenting a unified, coordinated front against the Burnham government?
Because, according to this deep dive, behind the scenes, the national unions are fighting a bitter internal civil war.
They really are. The text provides a highly detailed window into the internal bureaucracy of these organizations. Take the election for the General Secretary of Unite the Union, which is one of the biggest in the country. You have the incumbent, Sharon Graham, who secured 695 branch nominations, running against a challenger, Simon Dubbins, who secured 342 nominations.
And the Socialist paper is strongly backing Graham in this fight. They highlight her focus on industrial militancy, noting that under her leadership, the union has run 1,800 disputes and won £700 million for 280,000 members.
Those are huge numbers.
Yeah, and she's praised for being willing to clash directly with labor-run councils, like the massive bin workers' strike in Birmingham. Whereas Dubbins, on the other hand, is heavily criticized in the text for wanting to realign the union closer to the labor government, essentially seeking a more cooperative relationship with the state.
It is a debate over the very function of a union. The fundamental question outlined in the text is whether a union should act as a polite lobbyist, trying to influence the Labor Party from the inside through, institutional preservation, or as an aggressive, independent fighting force that treats a labor government with the exact same hostility as a conservative one.
And this tension totally boiled over with Unite's nomination for the new labor leader. Unite formally nominated Andy Burnham, but the Socialist Party faction within the union fiercely opposed it.
They brought up his past to justify that.
Yeah. Oh, they brought up his entire voting record. Voting for the Iraq War, voting for tuition fees, and introducing PFI, the Private Finance Initiative, which essentially involved the government leasing public infrastructure like hospitals back from private companies at massive financial markups. The Socialist faction felt that giving Burnham the union stamp of approval without extracting major concessions was a strategic disaster.
We see a similar, perhaps even more extreme internal friction detailed within the PCS, the Civil Service Union. The established union leadership is actively trying to suppress the militant demands of its own grassroots members.
The story they outline about the PCS is remarkable.
It's almost hard to believe.
It really is. So the General Secretary, Fran Heathcote, was in a National Executive Committee meeting on Zoom. The elected lay majority of the committee, led by the Deputy President Dave Semple, was about to authorize strikes over several issues.
Including the capita pension scandal.
Yes, that massive scandal where the private company Capita took over the civil service pension scheme and left thousands of people missing payments. So what does the General Secretary do when she realizes she is going to lose the vote to the militant faction? She literally walks out of the room and cuts the Zoom feed.
She just pulled the plug. She shut down the national democratic bodies of her own union. Mechanically, this shows how bureaucratic inertia develops. Union leaders often prioritize maintaining their negotiating relationship with the government over executing the demands of their own frustrated membership.
It's like a corporate board meeting where the CEO realizes they're going to lose a shareholder vote, so they just pull the plug on the internet router and run out of the building.
It's wild.
But if local union members are being suppressed by their own leadership, what happens when ordinary people who are up against international billionaires try to push back? Because the source zooms way out here to show this dynamic of grassroots resistance is a global phenomenon.
It is. The publication connects the struggles of British trade unionists to international environmental and anti-imperialist movements. They detailed the Flamingo Revolution in Albania, where hundreds of thousands of people in the capital of Tirana held 42 consecutive nights of mass protests.
And they are protesting a $4 billion luxury tourist resort championed by Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump.
Right.
The proposed resort threatens the Vihozin Delta, which is this pristine flamingo breeding ground, as well as Sazan Island, a former military base. And the way the Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama responded to this environmental uprising is really telling. He publicly blamed Iran for orchestrating the protests.
It is a classic diversionary tactic. Rather than acknowledging that local working-class people do not want foreign billionaires paving over a wildlife reserve, the state delegates blame to a geopolitical enemy. But the locals are literally tearing down the construction fences with their bare hands.
Just ripping them down.
Yeah, and the publication draws a direct parallel between this resistance and the massive anti-lithium mining protests happening in the GR Valley in Serbia.
And it isn't just environmental protests facing a heavy state hand. The text reports on two German anti-war activists, Kiar Stanger and Christoph Farwig, who traveled to Istanbul for an anti-imperialist peace summit meant to protest a NATO meeting happening in Ankara.
And the Turkish state detained them at the airport, confiscated their phones, held them in cells, and then summarily deported them back to Germany.
But wait, why would the Turkish state care so much about two German activists attending a peace summit?
The publication argues this wasn't just a unilateral Turkish decision. They point to strong evidence of collaboration with German authorities. The mechanical explanation here is that imperial and NATO alliances prioritize geopolitical stability and the international arms trade over domestic civil rights. The states collaborate to prevent anti-war voices from organizing across borders.
Which is exactly the kind of state suppression that is fueling the final major global movement mentioned in the source, a call for a massive international youth strike on November 20th. The slogan for the strike is, "Fight for our futures, not their wars."
This youth movement is framed as a direct reaction to leaders globally choosing militarization over social investment.
Like the defense spending hikes.
Exactly. Whether it is Starmer and Burnham's £25 billion hike in UK defense spending, or Trump's aggressive geopolitical actions in Iran and Venezuela, the youth are watching states consistently prioritize weapons manufacturing over funding education, healthcare, and climate adaptation.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I mean, we have flamingos in Albania, Zoom lockouts in London, deportations in Istanbul, and teachers striking in Enfield. How does this socialist publication tie all of these seemingly disparate threads together?
The overarching synthesis of the source material is that capitalism and imperialism are inextricably linked global systems. They operate on the exact same logic everywhere. Whether it is a local labor council in Cardiff trying to tear up a community park and ride to build a corporate data center, or international billionaires paving over a Mediterranean wildlife reserve for a luxury hotel, the mechanism is identical. It's the prioritization of corporate profit over human need and environmental survival.
And the solution they are advocating for is entirely reliant on scale. They argue that the only viable counterforce to a highly organized global capitalist system is highly organized international working class solidarity.
Precisely. They maintain that hoping for incremental change from compliant politicians like Andy Burnham or Edie Rama is just a dangerous illusion. The source insists that the working class must bypass these institutions entirely and build its own independent political and industrial power to force change through economic leverage.
It is an incredibly dense, multi-layered stack of sources, and honestly, we have barely scratched the surface here, but the core themes of political disillusionment and the intense friction at the grassroots level are undeniable.
It's a highly complex web. But understanding how this specific political movement connects a local bus driver's sweltering cabin to global geopolitical maneuvering, it's crucial for comprehending the wider societal unrest we are seeing globally right now.
Absolutely. And we always like to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds on the source material, but perhaps looks at it from a slightly different angle.
Yeah, so throughout this entire document, the text heavily advocates for the creation of a brand new mass workers' party to replace labor. They view it as the essential, unavoidable next step. But if you look at political history, third parties in first past the post-electoral systems almost always struggle to gain a real foothold.
Oh, they definitely do.
They often take decades of slow, grueling organizing to build, if they survive at all. So the question for you to ponder is this. In an era defined by such intense, rapid crises, from sudden 55-degree heat waves to the immediate threat of artificial intelligence reshaping the entire global economy, does the working class actually have the time to build a new political party from the ground up? Or will the sheer urgency of the moment force the existing political and union structures to simply snap first?